It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun, Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to be listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. It is great to be back with you here today. Really appreciate Lyndsey Smith filling in for me as I was really traveling all over the place and continuing to travel. I'm broadcasting today from North Dakota, from Bismarck, the capital city of North Dakota. I was in town here for, as I mentioned earlier this week, for the NSIC conference, the baseball conference tournament. Was able to watch my son at the University of Mary yesterday. They unfortunately lost, and so they're out of the tournament, but it was great to be here and catch some of it. And flying in, man, crop conditions looking really good. So I think there's a lot of people around these parts that are pretty happy about how Mother Nature is cooperating here early in the year. Low 70s in temperature. So it's, pretty nice spring days out here right now in North Dakota. Today on the Friday show, we're going to have a RealAg Issues Panel, of course. Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner will be here. We're going to talk about a number of things. More news this week on the capital gains changes potentially being made by the Canadian government. We're also going to talk about the latest results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for sure. And a few other things as well. Bunge. We got the Bunge CEO actually submitted a column to RealAgriculture.com. So I'm going to get Kelvin and Lyndsey's reaction to that as well. We'll also have time to talk to Wasko today in the beef market update. She'll be up next. And I got to ask her about how are we looking at these cash markets? What's happening, the select and choice spread? Just there's a lot to discuss there, including the impacts on the outlook for ranchers when it comes to some of the grass conditions, as we've seen real relief from that drought, that heavy drought bias. A lot of that changed this week, and you can almost hear that grass growing as the temperatures start to warm up, which is a big flip over compared to what people were dealing with the past couple of years. So it is absolutely great to see. If you have any feedback on today's show, there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. Number one, you can email me, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. A few people did that this week. I very much appreciate it. Great questions, great thoughts. Keep that stuff coming. Or you can, of course, find us across all the different social media platforms. There's too many to mention, but you'll find us in any of them. Also want to remind you that The Agronomist is happening on a Monday night. Host Lyndsey Smith, who is always here on the RealAg Issues Panel. She's the host, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain. It is RealAg in prime time. She hosts the prime time show, and it's always a deep dive into an agronomic topic. So you can find it at realagriculture.com/live or on the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. So encourage you to check that out on Monday night. We also podcast it. You can get CCA, CU credits as well. So please check out Monday night's show. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get to the we'll get the beef market update first. We'll get to the issues panel. Slow down, Shaun. We'll do the beef market update when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and Prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
It's now time for a product spotlight, joined right now by the CEO of Seeds Canada, Barry Senft. We're talking about a very important topic, and that is seed regulatory modernization. What exactly is this process that the industry has been so focused on?
The seed industry and seed development have a number of regulations that the seed industry must adhere to. A lot of these regulations were set into place over 100 years ago.
Why should farmers care?
When I got this job as CEO, farmers that I got to know had a number of messages to me. One was, we need access to new technology. We need reasonable cost to seed. Farmers know that there's a significant cost to bringing a variety to the market, but that had to be kept into check. They wanted competition within the seed industry. So those are three issues that farmers need to be, they are concerned about and need to be concerned as this SRM process continues.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time to talk about the beef markets. And when we do that, of course, we talk to one person and one person only. It is Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange here for the beef market update. Ann, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Shaun. Thank you for that welcome.
Yeah, well deserved. Okay, what's happened in the markets here this week? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a little bit quiet. Texas did trade some cattle at 185 midweek, so that's going to be called a buck higher. But we haven't seen a lot of trade, especially through the Midwest. So we're looking for that to happen today. So keep your ears tuned. But it does sound, a buck higher in the South, I guess, is what we'd call it now. That wholesale market, that choice cutout we keep talking about, it did gain $2.50 this week, Shaun. So the choice closed last night at $295.40. June is usually when we make our highs in the cutout. It's struggling to get back over that $300 that you and I talked about 4 weeks ago. Lyndsey and I talked about it 2 weeks ago. So it's really been struggling. So it is trading under a year ago, but it is up from where it was this time last week. That select spread, choice to select spread, still is fairly narrow. It's still under $10 this week. The 5-year average would be closer to 15, for example. Yeah. And again, I think that's a strong indication that we've still got really strong demand for more product, the round and the chuck to be ground into aid in supply for the shortness of supply on the 90 lean trim, that hamburger beef market, if you will. So I still think that's going on. It's been a very narrow spread, much longer. In June, we'll often get up into that 20 to 30 range in terms of that spread. So that's kind of interesting. It tells us still lots of demand for that hamburger product, and we're short of that supply. Here in Western Canada, the record just keeps rolling along. So we traded on a dress basis last night for 430 to 433 delivered dressed. That's steady to a buck higher than last week. So yeah, not any big gains, but we're certainly holding these record prices together that we've seen. Alberta cattle feeders, and Lyndsey and I talked about this 2 weeks ago, have certainly gained leverage. Carcass weights have dropped drastically just in the last 2 weeks, Shaun, 30 to 40 pounds dressed lighter in 2 weeks. So we've kind of moved right from, the yearling feds into the calf feds, and everybody's super current. Also, all of these things kind of click together. Our spot basis, where we trade vis-a-vis the U.S., we're into a premium position today. We don't often trade Alberta fat cattle premium to the U.S., but we've been there for a couple of weeks. This will be a third week in a row, about $4 to $5 over. Historically, Shaun, that basis is strongest for Alberta in June. So I'm looking at the calendar. I'm saying, well, we've got the odds are in our favor that we're going to have a strong basis here for a little bit yet. So these are all great things that have gone from first quarter. We talked about all those things in the opposite term. Now in the second quarter, we're looking at all switches have been flicked on. So this is good deal.
Well, and we're going to talk about the results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for April on the RealAg Issues Panel on RealAg Radio. But I want to bring up one piece of data from the April results, and that is outlook for livestock margins, Ann. Now remember, the scale is 0 to 200.
Okay.
Outlook for livestock margins, 173. That's we're feeling good about our ability to potentially make money here right now.
I don't know what your history of that survey is, but has it ever been?
No, this is like we're in May. It's the month of the Taurus, right?
Yeah.
It's my birthday month, so I am a Taurus, along with The Rock, by the way. He had his birthday in early May. But on that note, people are feeling bullish about this livestock market, or at least about their margins, I should say, which is great.
Yeah, which is great. As an old market analyst, I can use these old terms, but we used to say 10 foot tall and bulletproof, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of feeling how it is today. So that's all really good. I do think, one of the struggles, we're super current in Alberta feedlots, which is great. But here I'm as a cattle feeder. Do I pull cattle forward into these record high prices? Or I'm looking at my cost of gain, which is the lowest it's been in a few years. And I'm looking at record high prices. My economic wheels are turning and saying, for every pound I put on, I'm making some money. So it'll be interesting to see as we move forward here. We had to get current out of the first quarter, but now that we're there, it'll be interesting to watch these decisions.
Any thoughts on the Canfax cattle on feed?
Yeah, so Canfax will release their May 1 report this afternoon, and I do think that trend we've been seeing right since the start of the year, on feed numbers dropping below a year ago, dropping below the 5-year average. So finally we're into those tighter supplies, and it's going to be led by smaller placements. So that's Anne's guesstimates for this afternoon's report. So we'll see how that comes off. And did you want to talk a little bit about retail prices?
Well, I wanted to ask you about the weather and the rain that we have got across parts of the prairies. And you're in one of those areas there in southern Saskatchewan that did receive good amounts of rain, as well as myself in Lethbridge. We're feeling good about ourselves. This is nice. It can rain, man. We've proven it.
Yeah, and some super warm weather this weekend. So I told you at the start of our conversation today, I think you'll hear Southwest Saskatchewan's grass grow from Lethbridge.
Yeah, it's a nice change over the last couple of years,
it really
right?
Is. Yeah, super.
Yeah. So, and it's what we've talked about. You got to have grass in order to have thoughts about heifer retention and things like that. So it at least gives options for people when Mother Nature cooperates in the ranching world. Yeah,
in any previous cycles, it's taken profitability and moisture. Yeah. And we'd seen record profits last year or record prices last year. Now we've beat them, but it was the lack of moisture that really hampered those decisions. Now we've got the ducks lined up in a row.
Yeah. Hey, quickly, retail prices. What do we say?
Yeah, just real quick on this one, Shaun. I just wanted to bring up March retail prices from StatsCan, so Canadian data. They were down 7% from February, and they're also 7% below last March. Wow. So the big high retail prices happened in the third quarter of last year, June, July, and August, or July, August, and September, sorry. And so prices have certainly come off, and especially here in March, we've seen beef prices come down. On the flip side, Shaun, pork prices up 20% compared to February and up 26% compared to last March. So some narrowing of that gap. And I always worry about that. When beef prices get too far from pork, something's got to pull them back together again. So we saw that in March.
Okay. Hey, and thanks so much for joining us here today for the Beef Market Update. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll chat with you again soon.
You too. Thanks, Shaun.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Want a product that will give you nitrogen all season long? Then you want to try Envita. Envita gets directly into the cells of the plants, and it's easy to apply, foliar or in furrow. Envita provides the flexibility you need for your farm practices. Whether you want to reduce your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain your nitrogen and increase yield, Envita fits your farm. Envita SC formulation is OMRI registered. To learn more about Envita, visit azotic.com. That's AZOTIC.com.
Join us for the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, August 19th to 22nd in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Spend time networking on the trade show floor, hear from keynote speakers, and take in breakout sessions designed to increase profit, manage your rangeland, and navigate trends. Get up close to advanced techniques and hands-on demos, and kicking it all off is Lamley's Bull event. Proud, sustainable, and innovative, we are beef. Registration is now open. Visit CanadianBeefIndustryConference.com for full details and to register.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. It's time for the RealAg Issues Panel. Let's bring in the gang. They're all here. Lots of issues to talk about. First up, Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you doing?
Doing well here, Shaun. It's a little bit crazy. We're in the middle of seeding. Our chickens are coming into production, and softball season is in full swing as well for parts of some members of our family. So running around.
You get any moisture this week, and how are those crop conditions?
Yes, we did have a little bit earlier in the week, and we resumed seeding yesterday, and things are looking pretty good right now. So we will, of course, be dependent or wishing for rain as soon as we are done seeding, but in the meantime, we'll keep rolling here for the next. Looks like the 7-day forecast right now looks pretty wide open, so expecting lots of progress to happen here.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm south of you. I'm here doing this from Bismarck, North Dakota, and I was emailing back and forth with a regular listener of the show, Tim, who farms east of Bismarck, and he was saying like almost perfect conditions. And I'll tell you, driving around and flying into Bismarck, North Dakota here yesterday, it pretty green, a lot of water all over the place. So yeah, I think people are feeling pretty good about. We heard Ann Wasko. She's in East End, Saskatchewan. She was talking about how you could hear the grass growing. So, which is that's encouraging. That's good. It'll lift some of the spirits. Lyndsey Smith also joining us out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how's it going? Is it still raining there?
So we are very lucky. Today it is not. It is back to sunshine. But this has been the roller coaster of the past 7 days. We've had, like really rainy, overcast, like pouring rain, and then a beautiful sunshiny day, and then back to rain and bad. So it's a little frustrating for anybody trying to get any field work done. Certainly last weekend, Saturday was beautiful. A lot of field work got done. A couple fields got planted. But this week has kind of been stalled really for a lot, depending on how much rain you got, at least where I am. But the winter wheat looks great, and all of the hay fields look amazing. So we are very green, and everything's growing like crazy. And this week our sheep headed to the solar sites, so that was the big job yesterday. So there's enough grass for that, and in fact they probably could have gone a week ago, to be honest, but we wanted to give it a little growth time before we turn them out. So yeah, everything's green out here.
That's good to see. It's this time of the year is so nice compared to like 2 months ago, where nothing on the trees and the grass is ugly. Like it's nice to see some green out there,
and flowers, the daffodils and the tulips,
there's lots of dandelions. So there's take care of
that
those.
Is the first food for the bees, Shaun. That's fine. You're supposed to just leave your dandelions.
It's the first reminder that I should have sprayed them in the fall. That's what it really is. Okay. Earlier this week, we talked to Krista Thomas. She is with Canada Grains Council, talking about just the importance of this gene editing announcement last week. I'm not sure, because there's a lot of promises and there's a lot of like, here's what could be. But boy, I'm sensing from the industry, Lyndsey, that there is major excitement that Canada finally, maybe might have been last, but we finally got it across the finish line. We also have a poll about this in terms of what farmers would like to see from gene editing. What are we asking?
Well, okay, so I would agree. There's a lot of, for anyone who's been following along on the gene editing side, I think that there is a lot of interest in what this could mean, not just what's possible, but also the speed and the cost effectiveness of getting some changes into crop types. So that I think is also really encouraging, is what we can actually accomplish. But our poll this week is, we want to know what farmers are really looking forward to most. And I think I've already got a couple of really good answers, but up for grabs, of course, we're asking, what do you want gene editing to solve first? So is it nitrogen fixation or the nitrogen needs of the crop? Is it drought resistance? Is it purely yield? Is it harvestability? We're also asking, what about diseases? So cereal diseases such as fusarium, that one is definitely a difficult one from the plant breeding perspective. We don't really have great fusarium resistance. We have better, but not great. Aphanomyces comes to mind as one of those very costly diseases, and broadleaf disease as well. So we've also got an other, which we don't always do with our polls, but if your particular problem didn't show up on that list, that would be your number one thing you want gene editing to fix, go ahead and add it there, and we'll talk about it next week.
What would you pick? What would you vote for?
Oh, honestly, either, now not for my area, but either drought resistance or probably nitrogen need, to be honest. And then maybe that sounds a bit like, oh, but there's all these diseases to fix. Yes, but I think the nitrogen need and the drought resistance just offers so much more yield potential overall, and just that cost effectiveness of being able, if you could grow just as much crop with half as much nitrogen, why would you not? So,
Kelvin, what would you pick?
Oh, if that nitrogen thing is real, that could be revolutionary. I'm not sure how close that is in terms of what they're finding for potential now with gene editing. I know that there are some companies that have done a fair bit of work on pod shatter reduction, so under that harvestability answer in the poll when it comes to canola, and I think that's something that we could see commercialized. I know there's some commercialization starting to happen in the next year in Europe on that front, and I wouldn't be surprised and I think there are companies that in the canola seed business that maybe haven't had the strongest pod shatter characteristics, and the varieties are probably in close discussions with these companies that are developing the gene edited ability here to improve pod shatter. Sclerotinia is another one that I think there's been some work on both in soybeans and in canola also. So yeah, I think it is pretty exciting in terms of what the potential is here. And this creates, again, that incentive, or that knowing that there's this opportunity will, of course, drive more investment and exploration in terms of the research into what the possibilities are.
And potential new players. I think that's one of the pieces or angles of this that doesn't get talked about enough. This potentially creates more competition in the space because, one of the barriers was cost of being in the space through GM traits, right? And so if we are able to get to some of these outcomes through gene editing, it's through a less costly lane potentially. The other benefit here is for the minor crops. Oats, pulses come to mind. Like they're a big factor on Western Canadian prairies, pulses, but they're a pretty small crop. And we have a major problem with Phenomyces. So I think it's not just the disease of Phenomyces, it's the fact that we're solving a problem in a crop that is terribly underfunded, relatively speaking, because let's face it, corn gets all the dollars, it gets all the attention, but this is going to be a big benefit for some of the minor crops as well, that where we have not seen GM traits because it's just too costly to incorporate them into such minor acres. That's kind of what I see for sure.
I think that the flip side to that too is also just the market acceptance piece as well in that, and that is one of the things we'll see come on board. But for something like the pulse crops, etc., and same idea is if we've got registered herbicide products and things that can't be used because of market acceptability. So if we can use gene editing to solve some problems and they are, go through the regulatory process faster and markets accept them, then that's a slam dunk. So exciting times, that's for sure.
And on that topic of market access, of course, with the introduction of new traits and characteristics, new varieties, the access into China has always been an issue over the last number of decades. And we saw this week the Chinese government actually approved some gene edited wheat. So there is I think the concerns about selling into that Chinese market are coming down from where they used to be.
We do have to ask ourselves this, though. Why did this take so long? Canada was one of the leaders when this was first talked about as a concept, and is the potential to lead us going forward into this generation of plant breeding. One of the last to actually finish the approval. Some would say that is because, we have a high bar, super sciencey. And some would say our slowness is a detriment, and it fits into the conversation about lack of competitiveness when it comes to these things. So I think we have to ask ourselves that question. I know some don't want to ask that question, but I think it needs to come up way more often. Okay, hey, we gotta take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Dad, we missed the window for a PGR in our cereals.
Why didn't you add it to the herbicide?
What?
With Manipulator PGR, we can apply as early as one tiller. Just add it to the herbicide, no separate pass.
Don't miss out. Manipulator PGR is proven in wheat, durum, barley, and oats to shorten plants and even out the main stem and tillers. This results in reduced lodging risk, improved harvest efficiency, and increased yield. Talk to your crop protection retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. You want to use a PGR in your cereals, but you got no time for a separate pass. Manipulator PGR can be applied as early as one tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging risk, increase harvest efficiency, and maximize yields. Talk to your local retailer for more information and to confirm acceptable tank mixes. That is Manipulator PGR. Kelvin, that would help you, Kelvin, during spraying season. You're trying to get to softball practice. Just put it in.
Right.
One pass, man. Save you some time.
There you go.
Right?
Always looking for that. Saving time.
Efficiency. Okay. Now, one of the things that was talked about in the budget, Shaun, Haney, Kelvin, Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, all of RealAgriculture. One of the things that was talked about in the budget was this capital gains tax increase. And we're still seeing, Kelvin, major pushback from industry groups, and including in a story in the Globe and Mail, the Canola Growers Association was also mentioned. They issued a letter expressing their concern. Have you been able to get your hands on that letter yet?
Yes, we found the letter, and people can find a link to it on Real Agriculture on the website. And so the Canadian Canola Growers Association, CCGA, was one of 6 of major national business and industry associations that wrote a joint letter to Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland yesterday, asking her to scrap the proposed change to the capital gains tax, specifically the increase to the inclusion rate or the taxable portion of capital gains on an annual basis. So the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the Venture Capital Association, and the Franchise Association. So these are some heavy hitters that the canola growers signed on alongside in terms of calling for this. Also, the Business Council of Canada separately wrote a letter to Minister Freeland yesterday as well, voicing concerns about the capital gains change and calling on the government to not move ahead with it, that it will further undermine Canada's ability to attract investment and talent and inhibit economic growth in the future. These groups also saying that while the budget was billed as being about generational fairness and helping younger Canadians who feel that the federal government has let them down, this will actually, in the long term, not help younger generations, in that future prosperity will be put at risk as a result of this. And that's something that we've covered here on our Friday Issues panel a couple of weeks ago when we had MNP's Ryan Carrig join us. And where he talked about one of the specific concerns in agriculture is that this higher capital gains tax burden is going to just be handed down to buyers, younger farmers looking to expand, as retiring farmers or people looking to sell farmland or farm assets are just going to pass on that burden in their selling price to younger farmers. So effectively, this is a measure that makes it more expensive to grow a farm. And so that's an example of what these industry organizations, they're raising that concern in this letter. Minister Freeland has said that she's going to introduce separate legislation for this. It hasn't been included in the omnibus budget implementation bill that was introduced in late April. And so we've yet to see that legislation, but there is definitely going to be a showdown in the House of Commons between the parties, because they're going to have to vote specifically on legislation that applies specifically to the capital gains tax changes.
And the thing that is sort of lost on some people that are pushing for this increase is that capital doesn't really necessarily know borders. That capital doesn't need to stay in Canada. Mm-hmm. It can go elsewhere. It also, as we're trying to attract business investment, which is one of the challenges we have from a productivity standpoint in this country, this isn't exactly attracting capital either. Come invest your capital here so we can take more of it in the long term, Lyndsey. I think this is not getting through.
No, and I think the other thing that from the government's messaging, it's all, we're taxing the rich, right? And that seems really cool. That's like, yeah, let's do that. Until you start to realize that their definition of rich is your family doctor, your average farmer. It's anyone who started a business and wants to grow something. Maybe it's you. You are the person, you're a plumber or a welder or whatever, and you have built a business. You are the rich, according to the government, and they want a big cut of what you build when you go to pass it on to your son, your daughter, whatever. And so this is one of those where you really need to ask some of these tough questions. And I'm glad to see this list. And as Kelvin points out, like it's an impressive list, because this is the thing that people aren't connecting with what happens with these capital gains. And maybe that's because, sure, okay, the average person will never really have to deal with this on an individual basis. But as soon as you want to build something, a company or assets or whatever, you fall under this. And so I just don't think that people fully recognized, that the government fully recognized the pushback on this. But maybe that is why they're going to have it separated out from the budget, so that it can be hashed out separately and it's not going to be in the budget omnibus bill, so that, they can actually get something forward. But realistically, it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible time to do it. And ultimately, if they really want to support, an economy in Canada and the next generation of people, they need to actually take this out and support businesses being able to grow and to move on and be productive and create jobs. Kelvin, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of politics behind this. I think there's some strategy by the Liberals to introduce this separately to force Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to take a stance on this, where the Liberals will then be able to say, hang on, I thought you were with, turns out you're not representing average Canadians who don't have capital gains to report on an annual basis, kind of thing. But at the same time, this letter this week, it just happens last week we saw Pierre Poilievre write that op-ed in the National Post telling Canadians and organizations to fire their lobbyists because lobbyists have let them down. And that was in reference to and he wrote that in the context of this capital gains change, and specifically mentioned several organizations whose lobbyists he feel have not been effective, in that they have basically pandered to the Liberal government and been too nice to the Liberal government, and that they need to choose a side. Those organizations include quite several that wrote this letter being quite critical of Minister Freeland this week. So I wonder if there's a choose your side aspect to this, where Poilievre wrote that op-ed last week and got everybody in Ottawa talking, because they're wondering what their jobs are going to look like in the future. And here we have these organizations that he called out, including the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, writing this letter to Minister Freeland being highly critical of this tax change. I wonder if there's an aspect of everybody sees the polls, Conservatives leading by a lot, and so the tide has turned where everybody in Ottawa is positioning themselves for what looks like a future Conservative government.
Well, just use doctors as the example. The doctors were one of the first that came out and said, this is BS. We have, depending on which numbers you look at, we've got between 20 and 30% of Canadians that don't have access to a family doctor. Do you think this is helping us fill that gap?
Yeah.
Don't think so.
And that's part of the point that I was making poorly, is that, if we're thinking about this on the overall scale of the real issues that Canadians are struggling with, things like housing affordability, finding a doctor, our healthcare system, etc., this really works counter. And frankly, I hate to be a broken record, but this government tends to do this. They make policies that are actually counter other policies or other stated goals. This particular one on the capital gains works completely against a lot of the other things they say they're trying to do, which is to improve, the daily lives of Canadians.
Kelvin, so Minister Rechi Valdez is the Minister of Small Business. Shaun, she was asked that specific question about our existing doctor shortage. Her response was, we're allowing more doctors into our country from other countries, and we're going to recognize their credentials.
But why would a new person, a new doctor, why would you come here? Yeah, exactly. They might come here and then
I'm paraphrasing her answer, but that's what
exactly. Yes, but that just to me it's a great example of not actually thinking this through entirely and recognizing that people, if you're trying to build a business, you need to pay your own bills. You want to raise your kids, put them through university, whatever the case may be. Maybe you want a cottage. These are not, outlandish wants and needs. Why would you build that business in Canada?
We are competing.
You could go somewhere else.
Yes, we're competing for those doctors with the U.S., with the U.K., with France.
Exactly.
And
why would
where
you
this affects the majority of people isn't on it's not on an annual basis of having to pay higher rate on capital gains. It's on that once in a lifetime transaction where you sell your business, where you sell your farmland, where it's that once in a lifetime thing where many more Canadians are affected by that once in a lifetime implication here than on an annual basis, which is kind of how it's been framed as, it's only affecting those super wealthy who report capital gains every year. But they keep comparing it to like California and New York. Also, California, people leaving on Exodus like crazy. Yeah. And they're going anyway. Okay, quickly before the break, we've killed that one.
Have we though?
The CEO of Bunge has posted an opinion column at Real Agriculture. What is it? What's it telling us, Lyndsey? What's he saying?
Well, I think Kelvin's the lead on this one. I'll tell you, in that he's been keeping tabs on this much more closely than I have, but I do recommend everyone to go through, because I think, and I appreciate that Bunge reached out to say, we have this, will you run it? And, we talked about that this is an important part of this discussion to have. We don't have the final report or the final details from the Competition Bureau on what this merger may look like as far as on the landscape. And I think that from Bunge's perspective, they wanted to make sure that people understood some of the assumptions that were being made in the report that was put out through the U of S and through the three researchers who pegged it, I think, somewhere around the 700 million, Kelvin, if I'm right, as far as losses to farmers that this merger would have result in. And so they wanted to really point out, here are some of the assumptions that were made and where they don't feel those assumptions were fair. And so I think it is important to have that fulsome discussion of, yes, there are unknowns on this, but also it isn't entirely reasonable to assume that nothing would change from the perspective of, if this merger is allowed to go forward, there will be demands on what has to happen with assets so that the landscape does change. And I think that's fair. And I think it's important to look at it from several different perspectives, for sure.
Kelvin, thoughts?
Yeah, one of the main assumptions that the University of Saskatchewan academics wrote about was that G3, which is 25% owned by Bunge, would act as a single entity or be so influenced by Bunge that it would act in conjunction together with this Viterra-Bunge combination. And that's where the Bunge CEO, Gregory Heppner, in the op-ed that we published on Real Agriculture, he argues that would not be the case. G3 and Viterra would remain competitors after a Bunge-Viterra merger. So that was one of the main issues he raised. We have had a few questions also come in about G3's ownership structure, because it used to be the Canadian Wheat. Of course, it grew out of the Canadian Wheat Board when Bunge acquired, and Bunge and SALIC, or the Saudi Arabia Livestock Investment Corporation, acquired the Wheat Board. There was that farmer trust set up at that time, and the farmer trust still exists and owns 49.9% of G3 Canada. So there's several layers to G3. There's G3 Global and other entities with that name, with G3 in the name. So that farmer trust owns 49.9%. So those shares are still around, and farmers still own those, but it's not a decision-making part of G3. They don't have the majority to make the call on it. So that's one of the questions that we've had from farmers. Hang on, if they're 75% owned by the Saudis and 25% by Bunge, where's the farmer trust? It's that Bunge and the Saudis own that 50.1% of G3 Canada. So they call the shots on the direction that G3 takes.
Yeah, we had a call on the RealAg listener line about that very thing. Okay, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. Are farmers thinking a little bit more optimistically about the year ahead? We'll have the data for you when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
These days, the Canadian federal government and multinational food companies are investing hundreds of millions to support BMPs on Canadian farms. But here's the thing, nobody knows your operation better than you do. These programs need your feedback on what you want and what you need. The conversation is happening on Facebook Messenger. Do you have 5 to 10 minutes to chat today? Visit getyourvoiceheard.ca. Your feedback matters.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Here as we head into the weekend, Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, and Lyndsey Smith, all of RealAgriculture. And hey, listen, speaking of RealAgriculture, highly encourage you to go to RealAgriculture.com and check out all the great stories. We're not going to get to everything that happened this week, so you should just go check out our website. You will find a lot more there. Interviews and columns all about some of the biggest things that made news this week, along with a lot of agronomic features as well. And if you don't get our e-newsletters that come out every single morning, make sure you go to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Okay, let's talk about the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, the results for April. And interestingly enough, for the first time ever, Lyndsey, first time ever since September of 22 when we started doing this.
The first time ever.
Yeah.
In 2 years.
That's when history started.
That's right.
The farmer is more optimistic about their future financial performance than their current farm financial performance. And what's interesting to me here is if you are negative about either of those two, like it's going to be worse off now or in 12 months, commodity prices and input prices are the biggest reasons for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the number is still negative.
It is.
Should we point that out?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
But will we ever see a positive? I think would be kind of interesting on this one, right?
We will.
You think so?
I do.
Again, in the history of this, since September of 2022, we have not seen that. But yeah, we did see a pop-up, and it is, I mean, of course, Justin Funk can tell you how significant, but it feels significant. It looks significant anyway. So we're seeing, I think it's around that 87 or 88, which, yes, is still negative, but it's a significant pop from before. And so then you have to ask the question, okay, so why? Right? And that's one of the things that we often do as we look at the stats from the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is we try to figure out, and sometimes we have some follow-up questions that give us some insight on that. It could be, will it be a drop in interest rates that we anticipate coming up? Will it be that, the markets have bounced a little and maybe there's, we've bottomed out and we're tracking higher? Is it the time of year? And this is one of those things that as we do this year over year, do we start to see any trends? And I know, Shaun, your favorite thing is to tell us that no, the trends we thought we would see in, say, January so far have reversed entirely. Yep. So we're not there yet. But, if we have to think, especially in those areas that were very dry and got some rain around the time that we did this, does that just change your outlook entirely? It could.
Yeah,
so it's always neat.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at it again in July. But if you look at current farm financial performance, it's at 85. So it is, like you said, it is below the 100 neutral line. Future farm financial performance was 87, so a little bit higher than the current. The thing that stuck out to me, Kelvin, that it was good to see was when we ask about the future of the Canadian ag industry. So will we have good times or widespread good times or widespread bad times in the next 5 years? In January, we were 56. That's poor. It's 5 years, everybody. Very negative. We've popped up to 81. And so I think that shows that people are feeling a little bit, although still negative on the index, feeling a little bit more optimistic about what's in front of them. And rain may do that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Did we see much rain though before the survey intake?
Well, it'd been the last week of April. I think things were looking better than they were, in January. Yeah.
So
not the widespread rains of this week, but yeah, I think things were.
I think the main driver of all of the different categories that we look at here, and if people haven't already seen the charts, they're at realagriculture.com. The main driver, I think, is the rally that we've seen in commodity prices since February, March, and I think people are feeling better about having missed some sales opportunities last fall or last summer. And prices have bounced back to some of the same levels that we haven't seen all winter. So I think that's a big part of this. But I'm curious why the future of the Canadian ag industry jumps so substantially from an all-time low to 81, like you said, from 56 to 81 with 100 being neutral. Lyndsey, you talked about the seasonality, and looking at some of these, we ran the Farmer Sentiment Index survey in May of last year, May of 2023. And in some of these categories, May was the low in terms of farmer sentiment. And so it's interesting that this year it seems like if there is a seasonal nature to it, we're ahead of where we were last year in terms of that sentiment.
Well, one thing we've definitely seen too is an increase in the confidence of marketing crops up from 75 to 85 on the index. And that also maybe more confidence because the market has kind of come off the lows, right? Like as you mentioned, when it comes to outlook on selling crops, people are at 117. We were 95 in January, and now we're at 117. The all-time high is 138. The outlook on selling crops chart, if you should go to the website and look at it, it's all over the place. It's like a roller coaster. Compared to some of the other ones are a little bit more trendy. This one, that the outlook on selling crops really has bounced all over the place. So yeah, it's very fascinating. Really appreciate everybody filling this out.
Mm-hmm.
And the confidence in the Shaun, can you talk about the difference between livestock and crop farmer sentiment?
Yeah, Annie and I mentioned this in the beef market update. So, when we look at outlook on selling crops, we see, what did I say? Outlook on selling crops is a 117. Outlook on livestock margins is a 173.
So it's all the cattle.
People are feeling pretty good about their livestock margins. And you know what? Honestly, it's about time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The livestock margins have been, especially at the ranching level, have been very poor, and they're looking a lot better in today's world, especially really good after they got some grass under some of those bellies as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're going to be putting out over the next number of weeks some of the demographics. There is some interesting things that have changed from January when it comes to how farm size impacts your optimism and things like that. So, of course, we'll look at the East versus West. And also, remember, we've been talking a little bit about how American farmers are a lot more optimistic than Canadian farmers historically based on our research. Those two numbers are converging. Mm-hmm. Justin's working on a comparison, a post that we'll put up comparing some of that to the CME Purdue Ag Barometer as well. So yeah, fun stuff. I really appreciate everybody filling it out and being a part of the Real Agri Studies Insight Panel. This allows us, Kelvin, I was thinking about this, and you mentioned the Polyev, the column, right, that he wrote about you need to convince the people. I think stuff like this becomes even more important because this is really showcasing in a very simple way. Here's what the farmer's experiencing. Here's what they're going through. And it really, I think it's more important than ever. If that's the kind of world we're going to live in where you got to convince the people first, I think some of this work is more critical than ever.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that is how Polyev at least has signaled that he is going to, and his government would determine policy priorities. So yeah, it would be exactly through mechanisms like these, like what we do with the Real Agri Studies work.
Yeah. Now, Lyndsey, off calf. There's some questions about, hey, where is all the money gone? Where is it been put to good use? Of course, we had the Auditor General report that came out. We talked about this last week. What are your thoughts on off calf and some of the questions being asked?
Well, I mean, if you think the money's been well spent, I think is one that's up for discussion. But we do have sort of a full rundown. We are about halfway through that off-calf funding. And so we do have a story up that does look at where that money has gone. Now, we have at least two organizations because I think we have 13 administrators of this fund, and two of those have basically administered all their funding and they're done. They're not going to continue. They don't get any more money. So that's on the list. But you can see the breakdown between all the provincial organizations, a couple national organizations, and to look at where that money has gone. There are still, so there's 4 fiscal years left of off-calf, but 1 year essentially has been allocated already. So we'll still see sort of that money being spooled out over the next couple of years. But we are about halfway through. So, we did see from the Auditor General's report that, perhaps some of how this has been designed won't actually answer some of the questions as to the effectiveness at actually reducing emissions, because the programs have not been designed to necessarily keep track of everything that they need. But certainly it's pretty impressive to see where the money has gone. And we can, I think at some point, probably pick apart some of those numbers and see where it went. I know for people who have got funding, they're probably pretty happy about it. Will that impact, long-term changes on the farm? I think we've assessed that it's unlikely to drive significant shifts in production practices. That is something that we've also, used the Real Agri Studies Insights panel to tell us, that realistically the one-offs or funding like this doesn't necessarily drive huge production changes.
Kelvin?
This is something we talk about on the new Ag Policy Connection episode that we posted yesterday, and then in your podcast feed, you can find it on the Real Agriculture podcast feed. So we have a panel of members of Parliament from the Liberal, Conservative, and NDP, all represented. We have Cody Blois, John Barlow, and Alistair McGregor from the NDP. All of them voices for agriculture in their parties in Ottawa. And so we talked about the future of sustainability programs, this whole carrot, like the off-calf program, the incentive type approach, or stick approach, what these policies and programs should look like in the future. So people should check it out.
Yeah, and is it the right carrot? There's lots of different brands of carrots, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of
sometimes the carrot it's a less severe stick.
Yeah, sometimes it breaks. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So if I can, I think it's a bit of a plug for the podcast. I think it's really great to see the three parties sit in on the same Zoom call to chat with Kelvin, which is pretty great. I know that these particular people that they do work together on several agriculture policies on Parliament. So we appreciate them taking the time. But it is a really good discussion of sort of comparing and contrasting how some of the parties deal with this and bring some of that discussion forward. So would love to hear everybody's thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, there's also the unrealistic carrot, right? So if you think about, we talked about last week with the GREET model, right? So having to do zero-till and cover crops in order to qualify for the SAF, right? I heard a farmer say this week out of the U.S., listen, I can't do no-till. I have weed resistance issues. I cannot do it. That's not, how do you fairly treat that person if you're going to roll out programming that requires certain things? It's not the regionality and the variability, what's happening on the farm, I think just continues to cloud all of this to make it very, very difficult to come up with programming that is applicable or beneficial to a majority of people to participate in the uptake. That's the problem. And when you do recognize some of those differences, it gets so complex it just implodes on itself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
No?
Oh, well, totally.
Yes.
And that's one of the challenges. But there are ways of improving programs.
Yeah.
And a lot of it starts with data and actually having the ability to know what's happening. And this is where it feels like government policy in many ways has put the cart before the horse in terms of actually having a fundamental understanding of what's happening in the soil and carbon sequestration and how these practices work and how they work in different parts of Canada, different regions, different soil types, all those different things.
Yeah, true enough. Kelvin, we didn't even get to the Leafs, how we fixed them. Sad. I was on the Leafs bandwagon for like all of 24 hours. It was really fun.
It was, how was your time on the
bandwagon? It reminds me a lot of the Blue Jays bandwagon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, very parallel universes there, indeed. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Everyone else as well.
Yep. And Lyndsey, have yourself a great weekend with those sheep and the solar site and getting them all integrated.
Yes, thank you. And remember, it's Mother's Day on Sunday.
Oh, good reminder. That is good reminder.
You're welcome.
Well, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there in the audience. Indeed. Okay, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks so much, and we'll chat again with you on Monday. Cheers.